Good morning, Biology 30s. So today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the menstrual cycle. And you should have this graphic, I guess these graphs that show, first of all, the pituitary hormones, the gonadotropic, meaning they're acting on the gonads. Number 2 here, it shows the events that is happening in the ovary. And then the ovarian hormones. So these are the hormones produced by the ovary. And then finally, the events that occur in the uterus. So along the bottom, you see the days of the menstrual cycle. 0, starting day 0, that's like the start of menstruation. 14 days is very important. And typically, a woman's menstrual cycle is around 28 days, but not always. That's just kind of on average. So to begin with, when we're looking at the menstrual cycle, you're going to have to practice sketching these diagrams out. So you need to draw them over and over again. A lot of questions that you're going to see do not actually have the graphs drawn. You have to know what is happening to, for instance, LH on day 14, or what is going on before day 14 for estrogen. So you have to practice drawing these out to memorize them. So what is going on? Well, the first event that happens is that there's an increase or a rise in the FSH coming from the pituitary. And again, these two hormones from the pituitary, FSH and LH, are the gonadotropic hormones. The second thing that happens is, well, this is FSH, right? And so FSH, the follicle stimulating hormone, causes the follicle, which is the egg and its surrounding cells in the ovary, to start developing. So it starts to grow, and from about day 0 to 5, several follicles are developing at one time, and then around day 7, the dominant follicle is selected. I kind of jokingly call this one the chosen one, like the Harry Potter of follicles. So around day 7, this dominant follicle is selected, and the follicle starts to secrete estrogen. But remember that estrogen is the hormone that initiates the buildup of the endometrium lining, the lining of the uterus. Okay, so it initiates, in addition to all the things that it does, like secondary sex characteristics, it's going to start the buildup of the menstrual cycle. Of the menstrual tissue. So the third thing is, on our diagram, you can start seeing down here at the bottom that early in the menstrual cycle, we see a rise in estrogen, and that rise in estrogen causes, by negative feedback, a decrease in those two pituitary hormones, FSH and LH. So we see the rise in the estrogen causing the decrease in FSH and LH. So here's what we see. FSH, see, it's starting to go down, and LH here as well is starting to go down. Okay, so it's decreasing. And then what happens? Well, as the estrogen keeps rising, you'll see that it starts increasing and increasing. And eventually, this increase in the estrogen is going to cause a positive feedback effect. And so the rise in estrogen causes a positive, not negative now, but positive feedback. And at this point in time, this triggers the surge or rise or sharp increase is going to occur on day 14. Okay, so this rise, this huge peak in LH, we can see right here it's happening, this big rise in LH, the surge, the peak, the big rise in LH, that occurs on day 14. Now, that is going to cause two things to happen. Number one is this major event on day 14, that's ovulation. And the second thing is kind of simultaneous, is happening at the same time, is what that means, is that okay, so on day 14, this rise in LH causes ovulation, okay, which is the release of the ovum. The mature follicle has matured and now it's being released on day 14. And the secondary thing is that we cause the cells that used to be called the follicle are now transformed into the corpus luteum. So these two events are now happening because of this big increase, this rise in LH. So number 5 is ovulation, and number 6, the formation of the corpus luteum. So here you can see the follicle was developing. It started out back here as just all of these cells surrounding the egg. It developed, and here, right before day 14, we see the mature follicle. And on day 14, it bursts open, right? Here's the little ovum being released, and that little ovum is going to then make its way down the fallopian tube. Now, these cells that are here, and I'm going to highlight them. The reason I'm highlighting them in yellow is because the word corpus luteum, it actually means yellow body. And so these cells that used to be the follicle are now transformed, and now they have become the corpus luteum. Why? Again, it all comes back to this LH, this surge, this peak, this huge rise in LH that occurs right on day 14. It's causing ovulation and it's causing the formation of the corpus luteum. So what is the job now of the corpus luteum? Well, let me tell you. Number 7 here is what's happening. The corpus luteum, I'm abbreviating CL for the corpus luteum, secretes huge amounts of progesterone, which I'm abbreviating as P. So this huge rise in progesterone, we can see that it is starting to increase now on the graphs at the bottom, the ovarian hormones. You see those progesterone levels starting to rise, and it's also secreting some estrogen. So we saw that with our ovarian hormones, the estrogen hormone reached a peak right before day 14, and that is what triggered the LH surge. Okay, so here, backing up a little bit, this is where we saw this huge rise in estrogen. We know that that rise in estrogen caused positive feedback, and that's why we saw the massive increase, that spike, that surge in LH. LH forms the corpus luteum. Corpus luteum is going to then secrete some progesterone. So here's the progesterone levels going up, and we see a second rise in the amount of estrogen. Now, why is this important? Well, let me tell you. The reason why the rise in progesterone is important because it is what maintains the endometrium lining. What do I mean maintains? It helps to make it more vascular. That means that it is causing it to thicken more. Remember that estrogen initiated, it started that, but the progesterone maintains the endometrium. It keeps it thickening. It makes it more vascular. Why? Because we're preparing for the implantation of an egg, right? If that egg, which is now traveling down the fallopian tube, the ovum gets fertilized, then it needs a nice spot to implant in, to embed in, and to become a fetus. So we can see the rise in the endometrium lining. Remember that estrogen initiated the thickening, and that increased the amount of thickening. But this area here, number 8, this maintaining the endometrium thickening, this is because of the effect of progesterone. Okay, so progesterone is maintaining the thickening. So now let's see what happens. Let's say that there is no fertilization. Okay, so if there is no fertilized egg, what's going to happen? If there is no fertilized egg, then there is going to be no more corpus luteum. The corpus luteum degenerates. What does that mean? It means it shrivels up. It is going to basically die off. It's not needed anymore, right? There's no need anymore for this progesterone. And so goodbye. See you later, corpus luteum. It starts to degenerate. And that's what's happening on number 9. No more corpus luteum. And because the corpus luteum is the guy secreting progesterone, what do we see here for number 10? Well, we now see a dramatic drop, a decrease in the levels of progesterone and estrogen coming from the corpus luteum because it's not there anymore. It's degenerating, it's dying and shriveling up. So we see less progesterone and estrogen. And well, remember what we said that progesterone does. We said that progesterone maintains the endometrium. Well, guess what? If you're not maintaining the endometrium, then it is going to go away. And that you can see right at the end here, as we have a decrease in progesterone and estrogen levels, the woman starts to shed her endometrium lining. And that's what a menstrual period is. And so again, day 28/day 0 means we're starting a new menstrual period. So at the same time that this is happening, so the decreased progesterone means no more endometrium. And so you get rid of it. And that's what a menstrual period is. It's a tissue that if it's not being used because there's no implantation of the fertilized egg, we'll get rid of it. You don't need it. So bye-bye. At the same time this is happening, as we see a decrease in progesterone and estrogen, remember that this is causing negative feedback. And so because there's a decline, lower levels of progesterone and estrogen, FSH and LH start to rise again. And what does that do? Well, it's going to start the entire cycle all over again. That's why it's a cycle. Right? And so now if the FSH is rising, well, we're back to number 1. FSH is rising, and then that means that now we are going to have stimulation of the follicle. Follicle develops, it starts secreting estrogen, and so on and so forth. Okay, so hopefully that helped out. I've got a fair amount of videos for you guys to watch this week, and make sure you do your questions, memorize, practice drawing these out so that you know what's going on with the gonadotropic hormones, what's going on in the ovary, what's happening with the ovarian hormones, what's happening in the uterus, and you are able to complete the questions on this and be able to apply. Again, if you don't have these diagrams, you should be able to have them memorized, draw them out at the drop of a hat. Okay, talk to you later if you need any help. Michelle.ladine@ghsd75.ca.